Hello, and thanks for joining us on Chicago Tonight. I'm Brandis Friedman.
And I'm Paris Schutz. Here's what we're looking at.
A trial date within the next 6 months.
The Fulton County, Georgia prosecutor seeks a quick trial of the former president.
We cannot do this alone as a police department.
The challenges facing the city's new police chief, Larry Snelling, pending city council approval, of course.
And growing concerns over cyber attacks on hospitals, the impact on healthcare workers and patients, and what you should know.
And now to some of today's top stories. Federal relief is on the way for Cook County residents impacted by flooding during storms that hit the weekend before July 4th. President Biden made a federal disaster declaration for Cook County to help those who were flooded by severe storms between June 29th and July 2nd. Biden's move means residents can apply for grants or low-interest loans for any flood damage to their homes or businesses. Congressman Danny Davis says he personally spoke with the president and urged him to make the declaration.
Jurors heard from former Michael Madigan Chief of Staff Tim Mapes himself in his federal criminal trial. Federal prosecutors played recordings of Mapes' grand jury testimony where they'd asked him about his knowledge of Madigan's professional relationship with former top ally Mike McLean, who was recently convicted of bribery. Mapes is facing federal perjury and obstruction of justice charges for allegedly making false statements to a grand jury investigating the sweeping charges of bribery and corruption involving former House Speaker Madigan and ComEd. The trial goes on tomorrow.
More than 500 workers at the Art Institute of Chicago officially have a contract after voting to unionize more than a year and a half ago. The Art Institute of Chicago Workers United is an AFSCME-affiliated union which voted to approve its first contract just this past week. Workers will see pay raises between 12.25% and 16.25%, with a minimum of $18 an hour starting in 2025. Meanwhile, about 600 non-tenure track faculty at the School of the Art Institute are still negotiating their first contract. Workers at several other museums and cultural institutions across the city are also in varying stages of unionizing and contract bargaining. For more on this story, please visit our website.
Neighbors in Beverly and Washington Park will hear the familiar late summer sound of pesticide spraying in their neighborhoods. The Chicago Public Health Department says it'll begin spraying in those two communities tomorrow evening to protect residents against West Nile virus. This is the first spraying of the season. It's expected to begin at dusk Wednesday evening through 1 a.m. Thursday. CDPH says in addition to spraying, they'll place larvicide in catch basins to limit the number of mosquitoes that can carry West Nile.
And coming up in the program, protecting hospitals against hackers.
But first, the Fulton County, Georgia prosecutor is seeking a speedy trial of former President Trump and 18 co-conspirators. Details right after this.
Chicago Tonight is made possible in part by Alexandra and John Nichols, the Jim and Kay Mabee family, the Polk Brothers Foundation, and the support of these donors.
Late last night, Donald Trump was charged with 13 counts in a state indictment in what the prosecutor says was a sweeping criminal enterprise led by the former president to overturn Georgia's 2020 presidential election results. Take a look at what the Fulton County District Attorney Fonnie Willis said.
The grand jury issued arrest warrants for those who are charged. I am giving the defendants the opportunity to voluntarily surrender no later than noon on Friday, the 25th day of August, 2023.
And here to break down Trump's fourth indictment and why this one might pose the biggest risk for the former president is former federal prosecutor Renato Mariotti. He is also a legal commentator, columnist, and a trial lawyer. Renato, always great to see you. So how are these charges, beyond the jurisdictional differences, how are these charges different and similar to what Special Prosecutor Jack Smith brought in the federal case to overturn the election?
It's a great comparison to draw, Paris. If you put them side by side, Jack Smith's indictment is much more, I would say, narrow and carefully drawn. If Jack Smith was using a scalpel, Fonnie Willis was using a sledgehammer. She threw everything she could, fired every bullet she could at Donald Trump, charged sweeping crimes, including RICO, Whereas Jack Smith carefully drew that indictment, for example, charged conspiracy, not RICO, which is, I think, more straightforward to prove, didn't charge other defendants, carefully wrote his indictment, not to mention Mark Meadows, who I imagine he may call as a witness. It seemed to me like Jack Smith was trying to get to a quick trial, trying to avoid complicated legal issues like First Amendment issues, whereas Fonnie Willis made a determination that she was gonna throw the book at Donald Trump. She was gonna throw the book at anyone she could charge, and we now see the result.
And I want to get to those RICO statutes in a minute, but in a case like this where there are parallels between an active federal prosecution and a state prosecution, do the federal and state prosecutors coordinate or cooperate in any way?
Absolutely. Usually there's very significant cooperation. Like here in Chicago, I used to cooperate and work hand in glove with, state prosecutors. Back when I was a federal prosecutor, we would determine, okay, if we're going after a street gang, the feds are going to take this group of defendants, the state will take another group, for example, or, perhaps the state would be investigating a case and I would investigate it in parallel. We'd make a decision which side goes forward. This is obviously not quite the same situation. Fonnie Willis is going forward. She thinks there are good reasons for her to do that. Obviously, among other things, her prosecution will be much harder for Trump to shut down if he was reelected, whereas the federal prosecutions would be, I think, fairly trivial for him to shut down if he wanted to. So she's doing her own thing, but Jack Smith and her, I'm sure, are talking particularly about schedule in the upcoming months.
And maybe that's why the difference in approach is scalpel between versus throwing the book, as you say. So you're talking about the RICO statutes here that are some of the charges being thrown at Trump and his alleged co-conspirators, usually reserved for mob organizations, criminal gang organizations. Why do they apply here?
Well, RICO, like you said, the RICO statute is usually used against, let's say, mob bosses. It was used in the famous Family Secrets trial that we had here in Chicago, putting some of the heads of the Chicago outfit in prison. And that was kind of the original purpose behind the statute. It is used very often in the context of street gangs. The gangster disciples, Latin Kings, and others are charged using that. And the idea there is when there's a criminal organization, a criminal enterprise, it's a way to have the underlying crimes. And for example, in a street gang context, state crimes like murder can be attributed to this criminal enterprise, and thus the ringleader, the head of the gang, can be held responsible for them. It's not a perfect fit for a situation like this. I will note that in Georgia, the statute is more liberally construed than it is federally, so that's an important distinction. But look, even the feds apply the RICO statute to unusual circumstances. The feds in New York, for example, charged R. Kelly and his child abuse ring as a RICO case. There was a group of traders on a trading desk who were charged here in Chicago in federal court, and as a part of a RICO enterprise. They were found not guilty. So it does happen, but I do think it allows prosecutors to bring in more conduct, to hold someone responsible who is not personally involved in that conduct, was part of a group that was moving it forward. But the downside, of course, is it's complicated to prove, and jurors, I think, can at times kind of scratch their heads as to whether or not it applies to that particular circumstance.
It seems like, especially with the 18 co-conspirators here, this is going to be a process that's going to take probably a lot longer than the Jack Smith case. Now, finally, Mark Meadows, the chief of staff charge here, former chief of staff, he's petitioning to move this case out of state court into federal court. You would think that Trump might do that too. On what grounds would the defendant try to do that, and would they be successful?
He would have to argue, among other things, that the conduct that's being punished is essentially preempted by federal law. In other words, when the federal government makes a law in an area, states can't have their own laws trump the federal law. There's something called the supremacy clause in the Constitution, in which federal law trumps state law effectively. And so what they might argue is some of the conduct in Fonnie Willis's indictment, let's say, for example, her taking issue with Jeffrey Clark and his actions at the Justice Department, trying to write letters to send to Georgia officials, that is conduct that in his undertaking as a federal official, that can only be punished, for example, by the federal government, not by the state.
All right, yeah, Clark, the former interim DOJ official that was caught up here, so it might be an argument that some of these defendants make. Renato Mariotti, enlightening as always. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And up next, members of the Community Commission for Public Safety and Accountability talk about the selection of Larry Snelling to be Chicago's new police chief. So stay with us.
After weeks of speculation, Mayor Brandon Johnson finally named his choice for police superintendent, Larry Snelling. Here's a little of what the future top cop had to say about his approach to policing and tackling violent crime.
What I believe that we've forgotten everywhere are the victims of crime, the trauma that those victims deal with. We cannot forget about the victims. We have to have a focus on that. We cannot do this alone as a police department. Every member of this city has to be a stakeholder. And I'm willing to sit down, have a conversation with any and everybody within this city to work together to resolve some of the issues that we have and make this city as safe as we can possibly make it.
Snelling is currently the head of CPD's Counterterrorism Bureau. Mayor Johnson called him a proven leader. Here with more on why they selected him as one of the top 3 candidates are Anthony Driver, president of the Community Commission for Public Safety and Accountability and a lifelong Southside resident, and community leader and advocate from Chicago's West Side, Ramel Terry, one of the commissioners who serves on the commission. Of course, thanks to you both for joining us. Welcome back. Anthony, Snelling was one of, as we mentioned, 3 finalists that the commission forwarded to the mayor. What do you think set Snelling apart?
Yeah, I think it's his track record, his leadership ability. As Mayor Johnson said, it's his personal story. This is a person who is born and raised in Inglewood, knows what it's like to experience gun violence, and also knows what it's like to be an officer through almost every rank in the department.
Ramel, what were your impressions of him when the commission interviewed him as part of the selection process?
I would say that Chief Snelling came with a sense of preparedness for an opportunity such as this. He was able to share his experience, his lessons learned, and he was able to paint a clear picture of how he would move forward in this role in a way that it would benefit all Chicagoans.
For, what was it, a 31-year veteran, he had been sergeant just as recently as 5 years ago, meaning he rose through the ranks to get to be in a position to apply for this. Within just 5 years, Anthony, what does that tell you about his ability?
It tells you that he's dedicated. It tells you that he's consistent. He has consistently moved up through the ranks, as you mentioned, just 5 years ago, being a sergeant. But I think, to Commissioner Terry's point, it tells you about his preparedness. It's very ezy for him to relate to rank and file officers because he's been a rank and file officer. It's very easy for him to relate to the issues in the city of Chicago because he lives here and he's raised his family here, and he's familiar with our city.
Of course, he'll tackle some immediate pressure to figure out the city's problem with violent crime. Ramel, what did he tell you about his approach to addressing what has been a persistent problem?
Similarly to what has been mentioned in his press conference, right, is that there's a need to engage all stakeholders, and he has made a commitment to be very present, to be very involved, to be accessible, which I think is first and foremost most important for someone in his position, is that he is listening to everyone that cares about what's happening in the city of Chicago so that he can make a balanced decision and strategy about how to move forward.
Of course, he'll be also under pressure to accelerate the process of reforming the department and speeding compliance with a consent decree. Here's a little of what he said about training officers to comply with that decree.
If we're just looking to get officers through 40 hours of training, then what we're doing is we're putting officers through training, but we're not training officers. We can't just simply believe that the consent decree, without true enforcement of it, is going to change the department. In order to change this department and produce the best possible officers that we can put out there, our training has to be robust and it has to work for our officers.
Anthony, do you expect that you'll see more rapid progress on complying with the consent decree under Snelling, and how can the commission hold its feet to the fire on that?
Absolutely. I mean, our primary job, I know we've been noted lately for doing the superintendent search, but our primary job is oversight. We were clear with every single person that applied for this that got an interview that this is something that we will be paying attention to. This is something that you will be judged on and evaluated on at the end of the year, every single year, to make sure that we get our department in compliance as quickly as possible and out of the consent decree.
Ramel, this is the first time that the publicly elected commission has served its duty, giving input on the selection of the superintendent. How do you think this process went?
I think that it was a heavy lift, but I think the results of where we see all of these different parties and stakeholders who are excited about, Chief Snelling being selected for this opportunity is a testament to how great of a process this is, whether you're speaking to community members, business owners, affinity groups, officers, even, the police union, right? We're getting kudos for this process of making it transparent, making everyone's voices heard. And so we continue, we look forward to continuing that.
To that point, how do you think he'll be received in the Black community, where we know that there has been, a tradition of distrust between the police department and the community?
I think Chief Snelling has already demonstrated that he has relationships within the Black community and other communities, which is a great thing. Like, he is not just someone who is a Black chief, right? He has relationships all across the city of Chicago. He has it with rank and file officers. And so I just see that as an opportunity for him to continue that work and establish and build trust where it never existed.
Anthony, in his press conference, he also emphasized the need to prioritize officer wellness and training. Do you think, that Snelling also recognizes the need to sort of change the culture of the department? It's not just about training to meet the demands of the consent decree?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, one of the most disheartening things that I've learned since being in this position is just how stressed out some of the officers were. We have a very high officer suicide rate in our city. It's much larger than the national average. So I think his focus on training, his focus on wellness is well needed. It's something that our city desperately needs.
Okay, and we know there's some more steps. Obviously, a number of town hall hearings, a city council hearing. City council will vote to confirm. No word yet on when that happens, but we look forward to discussing it more with you all when it does. Ramel Terry, Anthony Driver, thanks as always.
Thank you for having us.
Up next, concerns over cyber attacks on hospitals. Stay with us. What does justice for Emmett Till look like for you?
Justice for, in our sense, is to serve humanity.
Black storytelling is a huge part of our culture, and so we wanted to make sure we gave young writers the opportunity to share their stories.
I think it's important that people feel empowered and find a light within themselves, whether it's art or not, but if it can be sparked with an idea, I think that's the type of things that change the world.
A growing concern for hospitals and health institutions, cyber hacking. Ransomware attacks on hospitals more than doubled between 2016 and 2021. In a recent case, 2,000 Lurie Children's Surgical Foundation patients saw their Social Security numbers leaked to a still unknown party, along with their names, dates of birth, and addresses. The FBI has called healthcare the #1 critical infrastructure attack target in the country. And joining us to discuss hospital cybersecurity are Robert Wagner, Chief Information Security Officer with ISSA's Chicago chapter. He's also the co-founder of Hack for Kids. And Patrick Dolan, Security Software Specialist at LRS IT Solutions. Welcome, both of you. Thanks for being here. Robert, I'll start with you. Why are these attacks so common on hospitals and health institutions?
There's a number of reasons, really. One is people at least presume that there's a lot of money. Not all hospitals are actually operating in the black right now, but it's an easy target. And right now, hospitals have been focused mostly on patient safety, not cybersecurity. So when it comes to systems like these, they haven't even really thought of themselves as being a target for attacks. But realistically, from a criminal's point of view, they're the most likely to pay, and they'll pay fast because we've got lives on the line, right? No hospital wants to put their patient's safety at risk, so they're going to be more likely to pay it than maybe a financial institution.
Obviously, it's a matter of life and death in some cases.
Right.
So Patrick Dolan, what are attackers trying to steal, and then what do they do with it?
Yeah, so that's a great question, Paris, and thanks for having me. So, what they're looking for is patient data, and specifically sensitive patient data. That can be social security numbers, financial information, obviously patient health records as well too, things around date of birth, addresses, really anything that can be used for, either setting up some sort of attack and hopefully having a hospital pay a ransom, of whatever amount it may be, or, B, using that information, selling it on the dark web. There's also certainly nation state plays as well too, and things like that. So multiple different, areas or reasons for these attackers targeting hospitals.
And hospitals, as you mentioned, Robert, very vulnerable, and you allude to this, but what are some, give us a scenario where this hack, like Lurie Children's Hospital, where it disrupted basically healthcare delivery.
Right. So in a situation like that, with Lurie Health, they just stole records, which is fortunate for them. I've seen other instances where an attack shut down enough systems and a baby died because they weren't able to monitor the health vitals of that baby during birth.
Wow.
Yeah.
So obviously, as we mentioned, life and death. So Patrick Dolan, what can hospitals do then in this situation?
Yeah, so there's a couple of different things that come to mind, Paris. I think first things first, making sure that you're just doing the basics of cybersecurity well. So that includes things like having an up-to-date incident response plan, understanding within the organization who has access to your data and what they're using it for, understanding where that sensitive data is, doing things around protecting endpoints as well too. Those are all things I think that are really important. Another thing I think is really important as well too is you don't have the expertise internally, and that's becoming a bigger and bigger issue with cybersecurity is finding talent. Finding those third parties and those managed service providers that you can trust, that have experience, that have expertise, and have helped organizations build out really robust cybersecurity programs. So those are just a couple of the things I think that these hospitals and healthcare organizations, regardless of size, really need to focus in on.
And Robert Wagner, you're saying that basically they're kind of paying a ransom right away because there's really no other way to get right back doing the business that they need to do. What is this costing?
Oh, this is costing billions of dollars, both to the hospitals and in healthcare fraud. We saw $308 billion in healthcare fraud last year because they'll use those records for all sorts of things, including extortion, fraudulent healthcare, maybe even getting equipment and then reselling it online. And the defenses against it, some of them aren't too difficult. Two-factor authentication can really help in a lot of cases. But if they don't have good backups, then they can't get back online fast. And that's probably the most proactive thing that they can do is making sure they have good backups.
And Patrick Dolan, and because of the nature of these crimes, this is really difficult, obviously, for the FBI or law enforcement to solve, and at least in a timely manner, right?
Yeah, it certainly can be, and these attackers, ways they try to, I guess, elude these law enforcement agencies is, for example, having you pay ransoms through cryptocurrencies, things like Bitcoin, where it's harder to track. So yeah, I mean, it's definitely something where it can be a burden for law enforcement to try and find these attacks, and in a lot of cases too, there's a study that came out from IBM recently that said the average time it takes to identify a data breach itself, so just them getting into your systems, is 277 days. So that's a lot of time in between initial attack to actually discovering these breaches. So it can take a lot of sort of work and forensic analysis and things like that to find the origins of these attacks.
Yeah, and obviously hospitals don't have that kind of time where they can wait for that. Robert Wagner, any other egregious examples locally? We talked a little bit about Lurie.
Yeah.
Any other big problems in Chicago?
We had 2 Illinois hospitals shut down this year because of, in part, a ransomware attack. So a lot of these smaller hospitals operating on small margins, a simple thing like a ransomware attack that stops their ability to take money in even can shut them down. So we saw 2 of those happen in Illinois just this year.
Where were those?
One was in Peru, and I can't remember where the other one was, but
smaller,
downstate,
like community
yeah.
hospitals that's just operating on margins here. Patrick Dolan, we've talked about the vulnerability of hospitals here. Any other kind of institutions really vulnerable, especially schools, government agencies, obviously?
Yeah, Paris, I would say really anybody that's dealing with a vast amount of sensitive data. So certainly financial services, I think you could throw into that, into that space, higher education as well too. But honestly, everybody and anyone is a target for cyber attacks, and that's not just reserved for the largest of large organizations. Anyone in the small to mid-sized space as well too. I really would say we're kind of past the point where healthcare, financial services, and retail are the main targets, and government agencies as well too. It's really just across industries as well.
All right, everybody has to be on guard for this. Robert Wagner, Patrick Dolan, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. And we're back to wrap things up right after this.
Where have we been? Where are we at? Where are we going?
Essentially to be able to help anyone and everyone in the community, whether that's through academic support, social emotional learning, or just providing a safe space for youth to be able to be there.
This is the fabric of the neighborhood. You need to take care of the neighborhood. It's an ecosystem.
And that's our show for this Tuesday night. Don't forget, you can sign up. You can get Chicago Tonight streamed on Facebook, YouTube, and our website, WTTW.com/news.
You can also get the show via podcast and the PBS video app. Sign up for those things. And
All
now,
of them.
for all of us here at Chicago Tonight, I'm Paris Schutz.
And I'm Brandis Friedman. Thanks for watching. Stay healthy and safe, and have a good night.
Closed captioning is made possible by Robert A. Clifford and Clifford Law Offices, a personal injury law firm pleased to give back to the community through numerous charitable initiatives.